Day One is a weekly radio program designed for Protestant Christians all over the world. It's based in the US, but it airs all over the world. And the way it works is a guest minister is assigned a piece of scripture to sermonize on, and then there's a conversation with the host, who is also a minister. And in 80 years of the program's run, I was the first Jewish voice to be invited to participate, which was a great honor. Just this week, I joined my friend and our neighbor and real ally, Reverend Dr. Jason Biasi from the Timothy Eaton Memorial Church, and it was at his suggestion that I was invited to join him on the program. So the piece of scripture that we were assigned was Psalm 79, which I admit I didn't recognize just by its number. I had to look it up to see what it was all about. And it begins with the introduction, Mizmor LaAsaf, a song of Asaph. There are a series of 12 psalms of Asaph. We don't know much about who Asaph was, but we can assume that he was a Levite. He was a great musician who filled Jerusalem's temple with ritual song. And I tried to imagine the kind of melody Maestro Asaph attached to these haunting words about the destruction of Jerusalem's first temple in 586 BCE by the Babylonians. Perhaps Asaph is the one who began the long-standing Jewish inclination to set our music in minor keys. Because Psalm 79 is miserable. Elohim ba'u goyim banachalatecha, tim'u et heichal kodshecha, samu et Yerushalayim le'iyim. It is a lament. Oh God, foreign nations have entered your domain. They have defiled your holy temple. They have turned Jerusalem into ruin. So in preparation for the Day One radio program, I did some learning, as rabbis do, and I came across a very surprising teaching by the great 11th sage Rashi. He says that Psalm 79 is not a lament. It is a song and an occasion for singing. Why? Because, Rashi teaches, God poured out his fury on the wood and stones of the temple rather than utterly destroying God's children. I find this to be a very moving and very challenging testimonial of faith. In his own time, you may recall, Rashi was an eyewitness to the massacres of the First Crusade, which swept through the Rhineland, and somehow he was nevertheless willing to see God's restraint in the devastation because some survived. Rashi's own teachers were murdered, their books were burned, and he devoted the rest of his life to writing down any teaching he had ever received from them. So in this remnant of the Jewish people, Rashi sees God's grace. It could have been worse. God could have completely destroyed the people, but instead God only completely destroyed the temple, only the wood and stones. But some Jerusalemites survived the sword and the fire. Only some were taken as captives into exile. Rashi imagines what could have been the end for his biblical ancestors. He imagines what could have been the end for the Jewish community of his own time, and he determines that there is something praiseworthy about the survival of the few, something even song-worthy. By chance, Rashi survived, and instead of lamenting all that was lost and all that was taken, he rescues God from theological ruin and declares that Psalm 79 is not a lament, but a song. It is a song of defiance, not a song of denial. The suffering was real. It is described in graphic detail in Psalm 79, too horrible for me to repeat on Shabbat. But there is a difference between denial and defiance. Rashi does not pretend any of the devastation away, but he does call for a song in the presence of the smoldering ash. So it won't surprise you that Psalm 79 can be read through the lens of the massacre of October 7th and how our people has suffered since. Shafchu damam kamayim. The psalmist recalls their blood was shed like water. Tavo lefanecha and kat asir, let the groans of the captives reach you, O God. Reprieve those who are condemned to death. And adding insult to injury, the psalm describes the abandonment of the nations of the world who look on and say that the attack was somehow justified. The psalmist says, we have become a mockery in the eyes of our neighbors, the scorn and derision of those who surround us. So, what can I offer you by way of a nechemta? There is another surprising teaching about this Psalm 79 that I chanced upon in my preparation for Day 1 radio. There is a Talmudic text which I knew from before, but I didn't know all of it. It goes like this. In Masechet Kiddushin, there is a series of examples of great sages who are good to their parents. And one of them is named Avimi. One day, Rabbi Abahu said to his son Avimi, fetch me some water to drink. Avimi went at once to get the water, but by the time he came back, Rabbi Abahu had fallen asleep. So what did Avimi do? He waited, and he stood over his father with that water in his hand until Rabbi Abahu woke up. So the story could have ended there. But it continues by the anonymous narrator's voice. It is taught that Avimi was rewarded for how he performed this mitzvah. He was rewarded in his study of Psalm 79. Because Avimi provided for his father as respectfully and as patiently as he did, God gave him insight into how to interpret Psalm 79. So what does this Talmudic tale teach us? First, that Psalm 79 is not easy to grasp. It may even require God-given insight. The Talmudic sages say, friends, if you are struggling to understand Psalm 79, you are in good hands. You are in good company. But what else do we learn here? There is something about the way Avimi tended to his father that cracked the code. What insight did he gain from that experience? How heavy did that glass become in his hand? What could possibly be the link between that quiet and private and precious mitzvah of honoring an elderly parent and the very loud and chaotic and public destruction of Jerusalem's temple 1,000 years earlier? Truth is, I don't really know. I have to be honest. But there may be a hint in verse 5, where it is written, Ad Matai. How long, O God? Will you be angry forever? Will your indignation blaze like fire? The psalmist asked this question, how long, 15 times over 10 psalms in 3 different ways. Ad ma, ad matai, until when, how long, until what are you waiting for? And I taught this series of psalms during the pandemic. You may remember when our lockdown was long, and we wanted to know how long. How long would we have to endure this hardship? Because it's easier to endure hardship when the timeline is known. Then we can be brave. Then we can be patient. But when the timeline is open-ended and unknown, it's nearly impossible. So Avimi must have asked questions while standing over his father. For how long am I going to have to stand here and hold this cup? For how long will it be until I can get back to work or to my own children who need me? How long is my father going to sleep? How long is my father going to live? How long before I become an orphan? Avimi's personal experience earned him insight into the psalmist's question. It's a question that does not expect an answer. We can ask, ad matai, but only God knows, because time belongs to the Eternal One. So we ask, ad matai, ad ma, until when, until what? The psalmist asked it about the destruction of the first temple at the hands of the Babylonians. Rabbi Akiva asked it about the destruction of the second temple at the hands of the Romans. Rashi asked it during the Crusades. My grandfather asked it during the Holocaust. I ask it now, and I know you do too. So a kind of answer arrives at the very last verse of this frightful Psalm 79. Va'anachnu amcha v'tzon mar'itecha nodeh lecha le'olam ledor vador nisaper tehilatecha. Then we, your people, the flock that you shepherd, shall glorify you forever. From generation to generation, we shall tell your praises. The answer to the question, until when, is forever. The answer to the question, until what, is praises. Many of us will find this to be an unsatisfactory answer, but it was enough for the psalmist. It was enough for Avimi. It was enough for the great Rashi. Generational praise is our assignment, come what may. Throughout the harsh history piled onto our people, our task is to praise the God of all life. Despite the suffering, you stand there and you sing psalms of praise to God who is above and beyond this history we endure. This is our sacred task. This is our sacred burden, lidor vador, from generation to generation. But we get to pick the key, major or minor. Shabbat shalom.